Hey everybody, Michael from the Watch Preserve here, and I brought in my collection to share with you guys today. Some of these pieces you might have seen before, so I'll roll through those kind of quickly, get those out of the way so we can go to some of the new additions from last time I shared this with you guys. First up, let's go through some Seikos. You guys will remember this one. This is my first generation Seiko Monster. Of course, you might be familiar with the story. This was one I picked up along with 3 other first generation Seikos at a little bodega store when I was living in Miami. I actually got 3 of them all for the original 2005 retail price, which was kind of crazy. A couple of them went off to other good friends in the watch industry as well. So this is one I don't wear super often, but if I'm looking for a nice kind of big bulky 2000s diver, this is definitely one. Makes a great summer watch as well. Great piece. Another vintage Seiko. These are proper vintage. This one is a 1972 Lord Matic. This is a JDM version with a really unique brown kind of sunburst style. I don't wear this one a lot. I find nowadays that unless a watch has a party trick, a chronograph or a bezel or something like that, I get a little bored with it, so this one might be moving on soon, but I do think that dial is just really, really lovely. And of course, it is always a good thing to have a kanji date wheel. Moving right along, this is actually a new addition. A lot of these are new from last time I shared with you guys. This is another Seiko. This is 1971, also JDM 6139 Speedtimer. This was actually the first watch I bought from the Watch Preserve. I got this last year, and the bracelet is aftermarket from Uncle Seiko. But I love the Speedtimer. I've always liked the 6139, and the JDM version really, really spoke to me with the Coke colorway. This one, probably the chronograph hand and 30-minute counter hand were replaced at some point. It should be that nice bright orange color. Every once in a while you see these were replaced on pieces. It doesn't really bother me per se. But this is one of my favorite watches. I wear this one quite a bit, especially for our cars, coffee, and chronographs, where it is always nice to have a racing chronograph. The next Seiko that we can talk about here is my 1984 6309 Turtle. This is in excellent condition. You can see most of the brushing is still intact. It's probably like this was never worn. I actually am going to be working on a story about diving vintage watches fairly soon, and this is one of the vintage watches that I dove with my buddies Brock Stevens and Jacob Van Buren just a couple weeks ago. And for a watch from 1984, it held up. I mean, it's a Seiko, just like you'd expect to on the dive. If you're familiar with the world of military watches and dive watches, you know how legendary the 6309 is. It's been worn by countless high-speed guys, a lot of special forces, a lot of really proper provenance from these watches. And it just goes to show that you don't need to have a super complicated movement in a watch to have something that's reliable and durable. There's a reason that they call these the Toyota of watches. You can't say enough good things about a Seiko dive watch. Speaking of dive watches, I've been wearing a lot of quartz lately, actually. You know, one of my days off, I just want something kind of easy to grab and go, and these are the 2 that I've been wearing actually a lot. This is the Momentum C Quartz 30, which I've not talked about yet, but I've had it for a while. I bought this just kind of on a whim, and I think for right around 200 or under 200 bucks on the secondary market, if you're looking for a really great grab and go kind of watch, these guys are great. Nothing special. Quartz power movement, day date, but if you're a fan of Magnum PI, you will recognize this style. So C Quartz Chronosport doesn't exist anymore, and so these guys are using that design language. And I've been watching a lot of Magnum PI lately, and I just like wearing this watch on the weekends. It's easy wearing, it's nice and accurate, it's the right case size. The bracelet this comes on too is great. I think for right around 200 bucks for a grab and go watch, you won't be disappointed. Another quartz piece I've been wearing a lot lately is the brand new, this is the 40th anniversary limited edition Citizen Aqualand. This is the C520 reference. I was lucky enough to dive this watch with Citizen and worn and wound at Windup in a Lake this past summer. And it's been on my wrist very, very frequently ever since then. The Aqualand took me a little while to warm up to be honest. It's a very quirky watch. It's not something that you would look at and immediately say, that's an attractive watch. But when you start wearing it and you start living with it for a little bit, you really fall in love with the interesting features. Of course, the original one of these came out in 1985. And at the time, there was a big crossover in the industry from traditional dive watches and pressure gauges to the dive computers. And so the release of this watch sort of bridged the gap between the two of them. Obviously, having an analog watch in addition to a digital dive computer in one unit is pretty appealing to a diver. And while I forgot to use the dive mode on the dive, I can imagine that in 1985 it was pretty revolutionary technology when it came out. A huge thank you to Citizen and Worn & Wound for hooking all of the divers up with these watches on the day, along with some other swag. It's a really cool watch to have a very special memory for, and it's definitely one that's getting a lot of wrist time this summer. A quick dress piece before I move on to some of my favorite watches. This is also a brand new pickup, just from actually a couple weeks ago. This is a 1969 Omega Seamaster 166010. This is one of my favorite references of the 60s Omega Seamaster, and I've been craving one of these for a while and just never find an example that I liked. And this one is nice and clean, original crystal, which is always nice too, and just a beautiful dress watch. So now on to some of my favorite pieces. I guess I'll start with this Aquastar. They're all my favorite pieces. What am I talking about? This is an Aquastar 63. This was another sort of impulse purchase. I have always loved the look of these watches, and I like the modern reissues that Aquastar has done. But the vintage ones just spoke to me more because I'm a vintage guy. I worked at a vintage watch shop. And this is a fantastic watch. If you can find yourself one of these in nice condition, should be around $500 to $600, $700 or so, right around there. I love these watches. They have a provenance similar to Blancpain or Doxa or Rolex of being used in really dive-tested environments. However, these watches have the weirdest bezel system I've ever seen. It's an internal rotating bezel on a non-screw-down crown watch. So anytime you want to wind the watch or set the time, you have to manipulate that crown, which maybe is not the best system for a dive watch, but there you have it. Apparently these watches are just as famous for being leaky as they are for being well designed, but I love the size of this. I love, on the Riot, on the chapter ring, the slight silver finish really catches the eye in the right light, and I think it's just a really, really charming watch at just the right size. Last but not least, everybody knows I'm a big Doxa guy, so save the Doxas for last. First things first is my 50th anniversary sub 300 Searambler. This is my baby. This watch has been with me everywhere. Many, many dives, a lot of hikes, a lot of other adventures, and I put a lot of memories into this watch. I wore it when I got my open water certification in 2022, and it's been with me ever since. This, of course, was the 2017 reissue that Rick Marai did when Rick was in charge of Doxa. Harkening back, it's quite literally, apart from the bracelet, a one-for-one example of the original 67 sub 300 that Doxa is famous for, and this will never ever leave my collection. This is my baby. Doxa, as you guys know, comes in 3 different dial colors. Predominantly, there are others, but originally there were 3. And I recently added a professional dial to my collection, thanks to Mr. Libby here at the Watch Preserve. This is a early generation, reference starts with 666. There's a theory in the Doxa land that the serial number correlates to production years, but with all things vintage Doxa, there is no really definitive factor. But this is a very early sub 300T with the US divers cosign. So this was a North American market sub-professional. And this one, importantly, is on the correct bracelet, which is it's less common these days. They used to be floating around on the market fairly frequently, but with the resurgence of Doxa interest in the past 2 years, they've become a little bit more difficult to find. They're out there if you're patient, but they're still pretty difficult to come across. This one is chewed up, which I think is how a Doxa should look. I've seen worse conditions, I've seen better conditions, but this one very likely was used by somebody who appreciated it. And as a Doxa fan, that's what it's all about. These watches are purpose-built and have been used in some very harsh environments. And so this is a very cool addition to the collection. And completes the Doxa trifecta of the color range. And last but certainly not least, we've talked about this a lot on the channel. This is the Joe Thompson Doxa Sharkhunter 300T. This, just for anybody who is not aware, has a fascinating provenance. It was through a rather circuitous route arrived to me by way of Joe Thompson Jr., who was the son of Joe Thompson, who was the longtime photographer for Jacques Cousteau. He worked closely with Cousteau for about 14 years, initially just as a submersible pilot, and then eventually transitioning over to photography and principal videography for the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau in the early 1970s. Joe Thompson was also a pilot on the Deep Star 2000 and 4000 programs from Westinghouse, and also a pilot on the Beaver Mark IV submersible, which you can see him operating in a 1970 episode of Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. I'm also lucky enough to have some provenance pieces from Joe here as well, including a mission-worn Deep Star patch from his days with Westinghouse, a Beaver Mark IV patch, and a Calypso pin, which really just add to the whole package of trying to keep that history alive with Joe Thompson. This is an incredible watch that has opened up a lot of historical doors for me that I love, and it just adds to one of the reasons why I love Doxa and I love vintage dive watches, is because the history is usually very palpable with these, and it really feels like you're wearing a little bit of history when you wear these watches. So that was a quick rundown of my collection as it stands at the moment, minus a few G-Shocks and other digital watches. But this is really the bulk of everything that I'm happy to share with you guys.